Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, April 21st, 2026. Welcome to the release of the fiscal year 2027 proposed budget presentation. As we always do, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So for the last several weeks, the commissioners, along with our capable members of our Department of Budget and Management and our administration, have worked on putting together a proposed budget. This is not the final document. That's going to come next month after community presentations, which are set to begin this week, and a formal public hearing as well. So just as a reminder, there is no public comment today because this is only a presentation. So again, what we have and are offering today is what the commissioners are proposing for fiscal year 2027. And to take us through everything, I'll turn it over to Ted and Heidi.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was calculating this morning. This is the 81st time I've done this. That was a joke. I'm not sure how many times it's been, but it's been a lot.
Maybe it feels 81 with us. Feels like 81 with us.
So we're here to talk about the Commissioner's FY27 proposed budget and our plans for FY27 through 32. This presentation is not an attempt to cover everything that's in the budget. We are trying to highlight the things that are changing, the things that are probably interesting to people. We want to give information on actions that the commissioners took in a larger context. And now to get a little deeper into that idea, so what are we going to cover? We want to talk about how did we get here. Starting point for the commissioners' deliberations was a recommended budget that the budget office puts together based on the current plans in place and whatever information we have now that we didn't have a year ago, whatever new direction we might have from the commissioners that we didn't have a year ago. We'll talk about the commissioner actions, the things they actually said, we want to do this thing that is not in our current budget or plans. We'll talk about some state actions and how that affects us in Carroll County. Talk some about how things are changing from the existing plan to the plan that's being proposed. We'll go through some operating highlights and some capital highlights. Because we're approaching things in several different ways, there are items that might come up more than one time. Only 2 slides and I already fell behind. Okay, commissioner actions. Carroll County Public Schools, they increased what we're proposing to fund the school system by $6.5 million above the $7.5 million that was already built into the plan. They added a capital project for a modernization or replacement to Liberty High School. There's a number of HVAC and roof projects that moved up in the plan, partially as a result of removing Sykesville Middle and Freedom Elementary School addition projects. And Sykesville and Freedom is an interesting situation. The timelines for the school system's capital and our budget adoption don't line up very well. So right now, Sykesville and Freedom are in the school system's plans, although there's expectation that next time around they are going to change that. Community College, commissioners added $450,000 for a feasibility study for the college's trades, technology, and training building. As of this proposed budget, there is not construction funding built into the plan yet. This is a project that will be something approaching $200 million. Public Library, Commissioners added $600,000 to support salary increases, funding to support 3 additional positions, and another capital project for a modernization or replacement of the Eldersburg Library. Community Media Center, Commissioners added $65,000 for a video series that they want to do in cooperation with the state's attorney's office, looking at various aspects of drug use, abuse, law enforcement, prosecution, rehab, and everything else that goes along with that. Added one-time funding of $50,000 to the Carroll County Literacy Council. In the Circuit Court, responding to anticipated legislation on how courts need to be staffed, they added 3 part-time and 1 full-time bailiff. Another significant capital project, this was already partially in our plans but has evolved some. This will be a major reconfiguration of courtroom number 6 to make it a can't think of the word I want. Put us in a position to have major jury trials like we do in courtroom 10 now. But also, the state's attorney will be vacating space that they have in the courthouse annex for the new building that they're going to be moving into. This also will include redoing that space. Emergency Management and Communications, Commissioners added 2 part-time call taker positions. This is an interesting change. We're constantly challenged on staffing in 911 and constantly challenged on keeping up with volume. They're going to try these 2 part-time positions that won't work the same sort of schedules that all the other 911 people do, so they can focus them on their peak times and days of activity. State's Attorney's Office, Commissioners included 2.5% for a salary increase. This is beyond the general increase that will come up a little later, and added funding for a paralegal position to help them with the volume of work that they're facing. Fire and EMS added 8 firefighter paramedic positions and 4 lieutenant training and safety officer positions. These positions were not in the plan, so this is new now, and part of what we're going through with our taking on EMS. We're kind of learning as we go, and to some extent responding to how things evolve. And then the Public Safety Training Center, this is a project we've been working on for some years. There's a number of pieces for it. Like many projects, we've seen significant price changes. There's an additional $5 million for this project. Volunteer Emergency Services Association. Commissioners are going to create a revolving loan for the companies to use for buying their major equipment, the pumpers, tankers, ladder trucks. These are vehicles that are now costing near $1 million and even over $1 million. This will not actually show up in the budget. This will be in our financials, and if a company takes $1 million from this, you will see that now we have $9 million available. Then as company 1 pays back their $1 million, that money will be available for other companies to use. Commissioners added $700,000 to the Visa budget in FY27, followed by an increase of $500,000 a year to what is currently planned. So funding in 27 will actually be a little bit higher. Well, have to see how that works out. But the funding in 27 is not carried straight through the rest of the years. Oh, yeah, and this is a good place to make a comment I always try and make when we're talking budget. County staffs EMS now, but Carroll County is still heavily dependent on the volunteer companies for the fire side of things. And There are people who sometimes think, well, the county is funding this now, I don't need to support my volunteer company anymore. Definitely not the case, still important, and we encourage you to continue to support them. Public Works, $7.7 million for Eldersburg area road improvements. We're focused on the area to the south of Route 26 and east of Route 32 to improve traffic movements in the area. $3.5 million for improvements to Maryland 26 Liberty Road between Georgetown Boulevard and Homeland Drive. This is money that we'd be giving to the state to encourage them to fund the project and move ahead with actual implementation. And $150,000 for the Robert Moten building. This is currently the home of Rec and Parks, was the home of the Board of Elections, but also has one room and a wall and a hallway devoted to a Friends of Robert Moten Museum. The commissioners have agreed to expand that presence some and have put $150,000 in here for making some changes. Nonprofit service providers, the Arc of Carroll County got a grant for 2 vehicles. The commissioners agreed to provide matching funding for that grant. Citizen Services added an administrative associate position and $125,000 of one-time funding for the Carroll County Veterans Independence Program. We'll be talking about this a little bit more, but you can already see there was a lot of focus on capital projects this year. We used to do a lot more capital projects than we have been in recent years, and I've actually pointed out to people the difference between the size of the capital budget you might have seen in 2006 versus what you would see in 2026. But we have done a good bit more for FY27. There's $5 million for park field restoration. County is heavily dependent on volunteers maintaining our ball fields. Commissioners believe we had reached a point where we need to take a big move to restore condition to make that a little bit easier to keep up with. Then there's $15 million for the build-out of Krimgold Park. We opened this park, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, with plans that exceeded what we actually had in place at the time. This is to finish that plan. And at the sports complex, a utility vehicle. Commissioners added $10,000 for the Chamber of Commerce. That's on top of the $10,000 that's been in place. $7,500 for Magic. Added an administrative assistant position for workforce development. Had a position in place that was being funded with federal dollars that are running out. This kind of coincided with some other changes, including we used to be in a collaborative relationship with Howard County on workforce for development. That split up a couple years ago. Some things Howard County used to take care of back then have come our way now. And $2,000 for the Carroll County Forestry Board. In Ag Pres, commissioners added $1 million a year in an ongoing way. This does not have to be used for our installment purchase agreements. We do some lump sum and some installment purchase agreements, but this money does make it at least possible if people are interested in the IPAs for making that happen. And then $34,000 to support an extension, cooperative extension educator position. This is a Maryland program operating in University of Maryland program operating in Carroll County that the commissioners partially fund. Commissioners included 4.5 salary increase for commissioner employees, sheriff employees, court employees, and state attorney employees. Just for people who are looking at this number, Carroll County doesn't have any STEP program, so this is the complete increase. And then 4% increases are planned for the remainder years. Kind of what goes along with a lot of capital projects is we've made extensive use of fund balance money left over from previous years, or to some extent that we expect to be left over from this year. 1% of budget, longstanding practice, about $5 million will be coming out of there, but then there's another $46 million that will be headed toward capital projects. So the idea here is cash on projects. Talk a little bit about the state budget. We're always worried, watchful as they're going through their budget deliberations. They did some things that affected us negatively, but we knew these pretty early on, and they were built into our thinking. Nothing more emerged from the session that had significant impact on us. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes things change along the way, and even at this point, we might find ourselves trying to figure out what do we have to do to address that. So their funding to our governmental partners, public schools is getting about $203 million, $6.6 million increase. Just a note here that a lot of this is tied to Blueprint implementation, so it doesn't give them as much flexibility as you might think. And we're going to come back to Blueprint in just a little bit. Community college is getting $15 million, an increase of $400,000. The library is getting a $2,000 increase, and the health department, a $100,000 increase. Now, I said there were some things they did that hurt us. State runs a pension system for the schools, community college, library, and many others. Some years ago, they gave us part of the cost, us meaning counties, part of the cost of paying teacher pensions. That's been built into the budget now for a decade or more. Last year, they shifted some more of that cost. This year, they shifted some more of that cost again. This year, another $3.5 million. Last year, for the first time, they did the same thing with community colleges. And then this year, they added another $200,000 to what we had already taken on. And then this year, they added the library for the first time. The amount, $34,000, is not particularly important in this budget, but the idea that we are now seen as part of how they pay for this is a very big idea. And then Maryland State Department of Education, we now get the privilege of paying for part of the cost of private providers of pre-K. I've always struggled to understand the state's logic on our participating in the pension system. I struggle even more with understanding the logic of us paying for private pre-K. I mean, we have absolutely no role in this.
That started last year. Was it the same amount?
No, it's more.
That's what I
And
thought.
last year, MSD billed the school systems for this. The school systems objected. MSD reviewed the legislative language and decided that it really belonged with us. It increased fairly substantially, and part of our problem looking ahead is we have no way to project where this might go. And that could be that there are fewer students, maybe it doesn't work out, but we don't know that it won't double the number of students. On things I struggle to understand with the state, not a direct effect to this budget, but interesting to think about. A few years ago, the state passed legislation saying if the state wrongfully incarcerated somebody and ended up having to pay them, that counties would pay half of the cost. And this is another one, we have no role. I don't understand the thinking other than it's a way to ease budget pressures. And at least 2 counties have already had to come up with money for this. And this is another one, we have absolutely no way to plan for this. We could be facing later this year a $3 million settlement, and we get $1.5 million. We didn't know for it, we didn't plan for it. Difficult. And a colleague of mine in another county brought up something I hadn't thought about. But you may have heard that a couple of years ago, the state took off the statute of limitations on child abuse cases, which led to a flood of cases. The state is potentially liable for billions of dollars that they have not budgeted for. This has not come up. I hope I'm not giving somebody an idea. But this guy said, what if they take the same logic there and say, well, counties, you're going to have to pay for half of that. I sure hope they don't do that, but given past evidence, I can't say it can't happen. Whoops. Money coming directly to the commissioners. So everything we talked about on the last side is going to other people. You don't control that money. Highway user revenue, $4.2 million, a small decrease. In current legislation, this is set to drop off by about 1/3 next year. Police aid, increase of $200,000. And program open space, an increase of $700,000. This is a big change. Now, program open space, it bounces around all over the place. It can change according to the pot of money that's available. This comes out of state transfer tax. But the state plays around with this money a lot. And it's not clear to us why we got this increase this year, but it's not something I think we can count on continuing. Okay, so changes from the current budget and current plans. Here's our proposed operating plan. You see revenues and expenditures, balances, and you do see that as things stand, in the last couple years of the plan, expenditures will exceed revenues. And when I say will, this is a plan. We don't know these numbers for sure. There not only can be, but there will be lots of things that are going to happen in the next 6 years that we don't know to plan for. But based on the decisions we're making today and the assumptions we're making about the future, this is what it looks like. Now, when we talk about changes, and this is pretty much literally true, the day you adopt the budget, things start to change. We start getting information, we learn things we didn't know, something we expected one way, we find is going to go another way. All through the year, we're collecting these changes so that we're prepared for the next time around. So some things have changed, and again, this is not everything, it's not even close to everything, but it's some of the things that are more important or more valuable to know about. Board of Education debt service changes, and this is pretty much true every year, because every year we find that the plan changes in some way. Our debt service is planned to projects where we intend to issue debt and the timing of when we think we will actually issue that debt. Debt service for other county projects, same kind of thinking. Things change every year and we adapt. And OPEB, other post-employment benefits, this is retiree health care. We've reduced to match the actuarial study. And this is a fairly significant change. Recovery support services, we expected to lose a grant that we ended up not losing. So money we had built into the plan, we were able to back away from. Rec and Parks, this isn't a big deal, but it's always nice to get a little good news on pricing. You know, we actually got a mowing contract that came in better than we anticipated. Transfer to solid waste. Solid waste, while it's an enterprise fund, under current arrangements can't support itself, so every year there's general fund dollars transferred there. We've seen some increases in the tons going in, which increased their revenue and allowed us to reduce how much we were planning to use of general fund dollars. And transfers to grants. Transit, we actually had an error we made in fiscal year '26 that made us able to make '27 look better. And state's attorney, there was a grant, and there was a position with a benefit selection that changed how much it was going to cost. And we think the grant will be picking up some costs that maybe we weren't planning on. So capturing those things, and again, remembering there's dozens of other smaller changes. Here's the numbers. In this slide, red is good. This means we were able to improve our position. Things that increased from the plan. So these are things that made life harder. State cost shifts, we just talked about that. Every one of those was something we were not planning on, means we had to dedicate money. And a point I didn't make before, every time the state does this, they are taking local resources and deciding where we're going to spend them. The commissioners are not making these choices. They're simply responding to a choice that the state made. Comptroller, SDAT, you might remember that we now pay 90% of the cost of running the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. Another thing I have trouble understanding. But more recently, we've been finding there's also other administrative costs that they're charging us in addition to this 90%. And there are increases in several departments, we'll be hitting these as we move a little further into this, that are offset by decreases in Department of Fire and EMS Services. What's happening here is in the earliest years of starting our transition to EMS, we were trying to capture pretty much everything in that budget so we could see what was happening. We've gotten to a place now where we think we can kind of normalize how we're approaching this to look at DFEMs like other departments. So there are costs that in every other department are captured in central areas, IT, health, fleet. We're now moving things that have been captured in DFEMs to those budgets. So you'll see drops in DFEMs and increases in the other budget, but they're offsetting. And for anybody who was listening, but the camera wasn't on me, I was doing a hand balancing thing to show those offsets. Other increases from the out plan, emergency management and communications. Every 5 years, we have to do a hazardous mitigation plan. Part of this is about getting a consultant to help us with that. And there are also overtime costs. And overtime is a constant struggle, 911, sheriff, DFEMs. And with all of them, we continue to work to try to get to a point where we understand overtime that's going to happen no matter what we do and try to budget appropriately for it. But on the other side of it, try and find ways to control overtime where there are decisions available to be made. Technology services. This is a continuing story. We've talked about this many times before. The IT world is changing. We're paying more and more companies basically rent rather than buying things. And it's a model that works well for the IT companies, but doesn't work well for us. We're watching our costs climb rapidly. Transfer to utilities. We have three school wastewater facilities. Utilities takes care of these, but they're not part of the utility system, so they're not included in what ratepayers have to cover. So this is coming out of the general fund, and that's why there's this transfer. But we added a pump station at Francis Scott Key High School. Transfer to capital, again, this is where we're moving cash from the operating budget to the capital budget to put on capital projects. And we've already talked about some of these, but I said more going on in capital than has been in recent years. Eldersburg, we mentioned, Krimgold, the courthouse. Park Fields. Actually, I've mentioned all these. So they're all just captured here now. So similar to the decreases, we've captured these bigger items and the increases. Here, black is bad. There's two spaces that have a little bit of good in them. But these are things that made it more difficult to balance the budget. Positions included in the budget. And all of these have also been mentioned already, but here they are captured all together in one slide. Some operating highlights. If we look at all funds, when we say all funds, government budgeting is set up on funds, which is unlike what most people know about. Most people are most familiar, they think about the operating budget, which is our general fund, capital budget, our capital fund. We also have a half dozen enterprise funds with their own sets of revenues and expenditures. And there's a series of smaller ones. You add all of those up, and we're up more than $160 million between 26 and 27. A lot of that is about transfer to capital, almost $35 million higher than it was in the fiscal year 26 budget. A lot of it's about capital projects, most prominently Eldersburg, Krimgold, and Library. And it's also important to point out here that we're talking about all funds. Remember, I've mentioned this transfer to capital. When we're moving money from the operating budget to the capital budget to put cash on a project, it gets counted in the operating budget because it's in there to transfer out, and then it gets counted in a capital project. So if you have $40 million of that transfer to capital, that shows up as $80 million in your all funds total. So it's not as big a change as it appears. Still a big change. The operating budget, up $65 million. Again, much of this is about transfer to capital. The next biggest piece would be increased funding to the school system. And remember, that was $14 million. Governmental partners again, except now we're talking about county funding to these agencies. Carroll County Public Schools, $266 million, an increase of $14 million, or about 5.5%. I just want to remind people of the state slide. State funding to the school system is $203 million. I think a lot of people don't understand how much bigger a player we are in funding the school system than the state is. Debt service, $16.2 million. Talked a little bit earlier. That's driven by the capital plan. And also important to point out, the state requires the school system to adopt debt service as a budget item. I don't know why. It's your debt, not their debt. We pay it, they don't pay it. Then state pension shift, public schools, $3.4 million, an increase of $900,000. And then here's that payment for pre-K. The community college, almost $14 million, 3% increase. Also for the college, continued funding for adult basic education. And this doesn't affect the community college's budget, but we have that cost shift that does affect your budget. Library, almost $13 million. 11% increase this year. We also picked up that state pension shift. Cable Regulatory Commission, an increase of $10,500. This is one that's a little bit misleading. Our funding to them comes from part of the franchise fee that you collect. We're starting to see that decline. No big surprise. We've been anticipating that. But this is going up. And it's going up because every year we project how much revenue we think we're going to get. And if we're wrong, then we reconcile. So this is only an increase because of the reconciliation, not because of the underlying revenue. Oh, I'm sorry. I said cable. I was on Community Media Center. So that didn't apply to the Regulatory Commission. So you see down the bottom there, there's actually, in their base, $12,000 less than there was before. Courts, almost $4 million, almost 10% increase. We talked about the bailiff positions that you added, and there's also increased funding for petty juror payments. We're just going off of what we've been experiencing in recent years. Sheriff, $32 million, up about 7%. Part of this is about overtime. Part of this is about inmate population. We've seen an increase in the last couple years, and they're trying to budget appropriately. State's Attorney's Office, increase of about 7.5%. A big part of that is the 2.5% salary increase you added for them, and the position you added for them. Animal control, basically flat. They are actually getting an increase in the money they get to use, but last year we had a trailer that was replaced that doesn't need to be replaced again this year. LoSAP, $700,000, that's flat. We will be getting a new actuarial study this year. We get this every 3 years. We'll see what our position is and adjust if necessary next year. Visa, we talked a little bit about this. A fairly significant increase. It's basically the commissioners responding to their argument that they're pressed on their costs, and you up the budget. Nonprofit service providers as a group, about a 3% increase. You remember, each of those agencies has an assumed rate of increase that the commissioners set some years ago and have left in place. Varies between 2% and 5%, I believe. Health Department, $4.3 million. And again, if you remember back to the state slide, this is about the same number as the state puts in. This is a state agency. They operate in Carroll County, but we fund, I think, a hair more than the state does. Social services, $20,000, that's flat from 26. Historical Society, Union Mills, flat funding. Elections, this is a bit of a surprise. We actually saw this go down a little bit. We pay the entire costs of another state agency, the Board of Elections. In the last decade, we've seen this budget rise rapidly. Over a 10-year period, it went from $250,000 to $2.5 million. So this was a bit of a surprise. I don't take this as any long-term indication, though. Conservation and natural resources, basically flat. Okay, everything up until now has been money going to to people you don't control, that don't report to you. Now we're showing agencies that do report to you. Emergency management and communications, significant increase there. We just talked about what was going on there over time, the positions that you added, and the hazardous mitigation study. Public Works, a big part of this is the transfer of some of the DFEMS costs from DFEMS to Public Works agencies. Also important in this year are increased costs for electricity and increased costs for fuel, both of which we largely handle in Public Works. Citizen Services, a small decrease. They are still getting an increase in their operations, but you remember there was a grant that we thought we were going to lose but didn't, that offset some of that. Fire and EMS administration. Now here's the decrease I've been talking about. Just again, for anybody, if you're just jumping in now, they're not losing their ability to do anything. We're just moving the costs from one place to another. EMS, $9 million, up about 12%. This is largely about those positions that you added. Fire services, up 17%. This is, Remind me.
I have to look back.
Drawing a blank on why we're seeing that increase, but we'll get back to that. EMS billing revenue. Now remember, EMS billing is a dedicated revenue that must exist in its own revenue fund. It'd be much more convenient if we could take the revenue from there to the operating budget, but we can't. So what we have to do is take expenditures out of the operating budget and put them in that revenue fund. There's an increase this year of $2.5 million, which isn't quite what it appears. In these early years, we have not stretched to assume how much EMS billing we were going to get so that we didn't overspend it. We found ourselves with $2.1 million basically sitting on the side. Not $2.1 million of ongoing money, but $2.1 of one-time money. So we're using this this year to replace some of the ambulances. This same spending won't happen again next year because we're not going to have it again next year. There's 53 positions captured in the EMS billing fund. And just a reminder, because we can only use the money for EMS purposes, and because the picture is going to change every year, the 53 positions this year might be 57 positions next, or 52 positions next year. We'll just always need to work to match things up in an appropriate way. So because you have the special revenue fund and you have EMS funding in the general fund, if you want to know the total amount we're spending on EMS, you have to add those together, which is this $22.2 million number. Rec and Parks, percent increase. Comptroller, up almost 8%. This is largely about those SDAT administrative charges that we were talking about. County Attorney up 5%. This change is mostly about adding some more funding for outside counsel. Economic Development, a decrease. Nothing is being taken away from their operations, but you might remember in anticipation of our role in Shamrock Farms, we had put $1 million in fiscal year '26. Management and Budget, a very large increase. A lot of this is about moving workers' compensation costs from DFEMS into the risk management budget. And there's also, for risk management, there's a thing called the Internal Service Fund. We put money into that fund from the general fund, but then we pay out our costs for workers' compensation from there. In '26, we thought we were in a position we didn't need to put money into the Internal Service Fund. So we're putting money in again this year, but you're comparing it to zero in fiscal year '26. Planning and land management, pretty much flat. There was about $100,000 of one-time costs in there that don't repeat in fiscal year '27. Technology services, this is the same story we were talking about just a little bit earlier. And audio video, there's a little bit larger, well, no, it's not really. This would have been the expected increase. County Commissioners, $1.4 million, up 8.5%. This is largely driven by the one-time funding for the Literacy Council that you included in the budget. Not and Carroll, small increase. Human Resources, this change is largely about consolidating our interns. We had interns budgeted in a number of places through the organization and brought them all together. So that increase is not an increased cost to the budget, but it shows up as an increase in Human Resources. Health and fringe benefits, just a reminder, we budget these things at the beginning of the year in HR, but then later in the year they get allocated to all the budgets. A lot of this change is about moving DFEMS costs from DFEMS to HR. Some more special revenue funds, the opioid restitution fund. This is just reflecting what we're seeing coming in. And a reminder that while there are a lot of strings on this money, in some ways making it difficult to use, we have a very nice natural match, and the state is requiring MAT,
Medically assisted treatment.
medically assisted treatment at the detention center, which is eligible for these funds. So we have a nice match between revenue coming in and an expenditure we have to handle. This will not remain true forever. This revenue will dry up. The costs are likely to continue. Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, this is the cannabis money. Another bone to pick with the state here. What counties are getting out of this is so small, it's again, just hard to justify the logic. But of the money we get, again, lots of strings on how we can use this. We are somewhere in the process of asking for requests for proposals from agencies that can meet the requirements of the grant. Hotel rental tax, this is dedicated to paying our costs for tourism. Moving to capital, high level, we've been talking about the increased focus on capital this year, and you can clearly see it here. $93.5 million increase between 26 and 27. Now, a reminder, unlike the operating budget, you don't really set trend lines in capital. It's very lumpy, goes up one year, goes down another year. We won't be repeating all these projects. Schools, $79 million of that money is going to schools. You'll see HVAC projects, infrastructure renewal, the Liberty project. You see $19 million. That's how much in 27, but there's more in 28 and
And beyond.
beyond. Okay. More schools, pre-K additions. This is being driven by Blueprint and the requirement to expand pre-K services. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, the private pre-K component of this, which we get to pay part of. We also have to build space. We don't have sufficient capacity to handle all these students. And while the state participates in these projects, if we weren't required to do this, that money could have been going to funding other projects. Here's a few roof projects. Looking at further years. Oh, yes. And Freedom Elementary School is on here and should not be. Somehow that got by us. But as we mentioned earlier, that's been removed from the plan. But we look at 28 and beyond, you see some more HVAC projects, more of the Liberty High School modernization or replacement. Also roof replacements. And, you know, with HVAC and roof replacements, the prices on doing these projects have grown so much. Roof projects at one time seemed relatively minor, but now, I mean, we have roof projects that can be $10 million, probably more. Some things not in, and this is a very short list, and I should say the list could have been a lot longer. And probably the biggest thing to be thinking about here is this idea of modernizations or replacements of school. There's a long line of potential projects for doing this. They are not in our plan. It's difficult to see how we would get them into our plan, which is why you see so many HVAC and roof projects, because they're not getting done as part of a comprehensive project. But at best, program expansion for Robert Moten is not in. William Winchester Elementary, which is the next priority for modernizations, is not included. Conservation and open space, mentioned earlier, the commissioners added an ongoing $1 million a year. Fire and EMS Public Safety Training Center remediation. This is about the contaminated soil on that site. And remember, this is from years of using fire suppression foam that had PFAs in it. This is a lot of money, but what we believe is going to be necessary to take care of that soil. And then water quality funding. These are ongoing items. And those continue throughout the plan. Roads, we mentioned the Eldersburg improvements and the Liberty Road improvements. We have our ongoing pavement management, which is now in excess of $20 million a year. And when I say pavement management, for people who might be listening, who don't know, this is taking care of the county road system. Then there are other projects that continue throughout the plan. There are things that are not in. And not in, I usually bring this up every year just to remind people, because almost every year somebody will come up to me and say, well, if there's not enough money, you can't fund everything. Why don't you not do projects? And the reality is we don't do a lot of projects. Doesn't get a lot of discussion all the time unless somebody makes a point of coming to the commissioners to say, we really think you need to fund this. But our starting point isn't what people asked for. Our starting point is the plan that you have and where we need to move from there. Bridges, I'm not going to go through all this, but there are always bridge projects. Most of our bridges are 80% funded by federal funding. This is one of the lingering concerns about changes happening at the federal level. If at some point they decided this is not a federal responsibility, that would be a big change for us. Rec and parks. Also always a lot of rec and parks projects. This is because we have a dedicated source of revenue in program open space, state sharing of transfer tax. The money is not available to be used in any other way, so it gets used here. Now, this budget does have a significant change in that idea of funding. The $15 million for Crimgold and the $5 million for field restoration are not coming out of program open space. Those are general fund dollars that the commissioners chose to dedicate to these purposes. A significant change in our approach. Some small projects at Piney Run, and then as you look out the other years, there's some things that happen every year, but also lighting for Cape Horn, Pavilion of Freedom, and Hashiwa, replacement of the Raptor Muse. General government. Now, I always like to remind people here, people hear general government, well, why are you spending so much money on general government? There's a lot of things included here, including the community college. We have the feasibility study for the tech training trades. Forget.
Technology and training.
But again, a reminder, the commissioners budgeted the feasibility study, but not yet the project. There are $2 million of systemic renovations at the college. Similarly for county buildings. And then $10 million for the courthouse project we talked about earlier. Some small projects, but here again is the Eldersburg Library, also shows up in general government. Replacing radios goes on every year. Money for the training center we mentioned a little bit earlier. Wasn't always true, but self-contained breathing apparatus is now fully in the commissioner's budget. Some other smaller projects. Look out through the plan. This is all things that just continue every year. Same here. These are projects we have every year. Some things that aren't in. At workforce development, a bathroom and an elevator. Emergency management and communications. We are facing growing volume at the dispatch center. You added a couple part-time positions. There's been talk of adding other positions. We're in a place where we're very close to not being able to operate out of the facilities we have. This would be another major new project. Library requested 2 more projects that are not in here, a handful of senior center projects that are not in the plan. Detention center is another one I talk about every year. Today's not the day, but there will be a day when we're going to need to build a new detention center. That will be another major project. Enterprise funds. And again, these are their own funds, their own revenues and expenditures. Airport going up about 2.5%. Fiber network close to flat. Firearms, small increase. Septage, almost a 10% increase. This is about some
Decrease.
work we need to do. I don't think I can adequately explain, but something to do with the electrical system. Solid waste, talked about that change in volume. But even at this, remember, general fund transfer remains important for this fund, even though it actually went down this year. And looking further ahead, thinking about capital projects, we're going to be taking on a major project to develop the additional land we own at the landfill now, which will enable us to bury more, transfer less, which will fundamentally change the financial picture for this fund and maybe put it in a position where it actually can support itself. Utilities, significant increase. You recently approved rate increases very directly connected to this. This is partially about operating costs, but also in a significant way about the capital costs of renewing the system over time. Here are those rates. And, you know, I've said this before, but probably doesn't hurt to say it again. Nobody really wants to think about water and sewer rates. People who pay them don't want them. The commissioners aren't looking to increase them. Public Works doesn't want to come to you and ask for them. The reason this happens is because this is the revenue that will be necessary to pay the costs that you're going to have to pay. Enterprise fund capital projects. Nothing significant going on at the airport in a current budgeting way. Of course, we have the runway project, which is a very significant project, but there's no action you took in connection with that in this budget. Utilities, always a lot of projects going on, and this is about, you know, that idea of renewing the infrastructure. Some are fairly inexpensive, some are very expensive. And then looking out the future years, and a not in for solid waste. Talked about repaving a road in there. It didn't seem urgent, and because we are doing a master plan and thinking about how we're going to develop it, it didn't seem necessary to do this road now before we figure all that out. So starting tomorrow, there will be a series of 5 meetings in our libraries. I will bring this presentation to the public to walk them through what's in, what's not, to the extent that I can, you know, help with, you know, why did we get there. I always remind people, In many cases, we're talking about policy decisions. If you have questions, objections, way to go, guys. Those should be directed to the commissioners. I'll look to give you information and explain, but I'm not the one who makes those decisions. All the presentations will start at 7 o'clock. And I'll be a nag for a moment. I've been disappointed for years about the lack of people who show up at these meetings. Every now and again, might get 30 or 40, but that's very unusual. More typically, get 4 or 5 or 6. And it's always frustrating when people say later, why didn't I know this was in the budget? And say, well, did you come to the meeting? I talked about that. And I can't make them come. The public hearing that Commissioner Vigliotti mentioned earlier is May 6th at 7 o'clock. That's at the Carroll Arts Center. This is the opportunity for the public to come and make comments for or against the budget or things in the budget. Each person gets their opportunity for 3 minutes to offer their comments to the commissioners. Following that, there are 2 sessions scheduled for the commissioners to consider any changes that they might want to make to what we just talked about. Budget adoption is scheduled for 9 o'clock on May the 21st. And the budget will be available online. Do we have an anticipated date?
Hopefully the end of this week.
We hope by the end of this week. And on the idea of providing information or where to find things, here's my email address and my phone number. Send me an email, give me a call, and we'll do what we can to help you. Okay, so that's what we had for you, commissioners. Unless there are any questions you wanted to ask or any comments that you wanted to make.
Ted, just a couple. On the education piece, that's always of interest to everybody. And I think we ought to be as clear as possible in explaining where we stand. So right on this one, it says increase of 6.5 million, but we already had 7.5 in the plan.
I did mention that.
No, you mentioned, but I think we like to write it, put that here, only because it truly is a bigger increase. And then we need to say how much above maintenance of effort it is and explain the narrative that I've been hearing is just so misinformed about where we stand and what we put in compared to the state. And it's been frustrating for years. It's frustrating the way they do the formula, but Carroll County has always been above maintenance of effort, and substantially. But I think it's nice to people are learning this stuff every year, so you almost have to make believe they don't know anything about it. And how much above maintenance of effort we've been, and then how many costs have been shifted over. And it's not just for the school system, but in here you're putting the increase in the costs that are shifted over. I think it would be nice for all of us to have the totals that have been shifted over for the whole each year, not just the increase in the cost shift, but what's already baked in that they've already shifted. So we can say, this is how much for teacher pensions have been shifted for this year, the total, and for the libraries, because that is all already baked into the budget, but it's a big number, and it does not count in maintenance of effort. And what I've said, and we fought this for years in the legislature, we have no control over any of that. We don't have any control over the plan design. We have no control over the benefit package. We have no control over the things that they're shifting. So if we could have not just the increases of what's being shifted, but the total of what's, what I'm saying, I think it would be a more accurate number in perspective of what the county, as you said, with no control, has been asked on each of these agencies to pay. And I know the governor has complained a lot about the federal government shifting stuff to the states. Maybe it appropriately belongs there if they can control it. We're getting stuff shifted to us that we don't have any control over, like Board of Elections. It's early voting. How much does that cost? It's a big, it all adds up. So I just think the more that we can really let people understand how much the county is doing for education and always has and been above maintenance of effort, how we got, the past boards funded, blueprint teacher salaries earlier than most counties in the state. We did it, I think, 2 years ahead of time. Half the counties have not gotten there yet. We did it 2 years ago. Last board did it 2 years ago. So I think we need to tell that story of effort that we have done And then, all the capital money and the debt service on that doesn't even count, and yet we've been very generous with trying to replace buildings and keep up with buildings, even though the costs have not been equally necessarily shared with the state. The amount of funding for capital projects has gone down. So I just think the more you can explain it to every group of people and they hear it, they'll appreciate, because I just get tired of one statistic that we're 24th. We've been 24th for many years, but it's not us that's not up there. It's the state that keeps redoing the formulas, and it doesn't, our population is pretty vanilla, and we don't have all those special little categories, out there that they give all the extra funding for, but we still perform very well and participate. The county participates. I've always been grateful for that, even as a school board member, of the participation of the county and the effort that we've done. So I just think we need to tout our own horn in explaining that, because that one data point of 24 does not indicate, we're usually 9th or 8th, it varies. It's the state portion that's low. And then all these other shifts, again, if we could get a total of each shift, not just the increase in the shift, but the whole shift for each of the categories, it would show the true amount of money that we're dedicating to these different entities.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Heidi.